synthesis of a lot of evidence in all the areas.
I've worked with people like Willie Soon and Sally Baliunas and other astrophysicists, and of course what they're looking at is how the sun functions, and in the same way that geoscientists are looking at the way the Earth functions. And I mean, for example, how many people know that the sun is tilted by 7 degrees? We talked about the tilt of the Earth at 23.5. The sun is tilted by 7 degrees. We've talked about Milankovitch, which is changes in the sun-Earth, the physical relations between the sun-Earth.
Apparently we're in a solar cycle, they say. They say we're in solar cycle 24, and that there's solar flares that they're watching.
Yeah, the solar cycles, the first one starts with Galileo in 1610, but they're not numbered until 1735, I believe it is. And so starting with that as number 1, we're now in cycle 23 and supposed to be going into 24.
And that's the one some people are concerned about. But there are a whole bunch
of cycles. I just want to make one quick comment to Bob's comment about cycles on cycles on cycles. There was a conference in Warsaw in 1990. Scientists were arguing that everything's cyclical. It's just that there's such a complexity of cycles to separate out any one. And the Russians have also done a lot of work on the cycles of weather affecting economies. For example, the Kondratiev cycle. But the Western world was arguing, no, they were into chaos theory. That no, none of this is cyclical, none of it's predictable. And it's just chaos. You can't assume, because you've got a correlation, you can't just say because, there's more sunspots and the temperature's higher, you can't assume that they're cause and effect. Okay, that the sunspots, therefore, are causing the temperature to change. All you can do is say, look, there's a high correlation, but that isn't necessarily cause and effect. And it's one of the ones I spent hours talking to my students about this, giving them examples. And the classic one that's kicking around now is, there's a very high correlation between obesity and Diet Coke, because the biggest drinkers of Diet Coke are obese people. But you just simply can't make the cause and effect relationship like that. And that was the problem with the sunspot data. But now, starting in 1991, there was a guy by the name of Christensen and Svensmark. They came out with this cosmic cloud thing that Joe was talking about. And we've known for a long time that there's more clouds than there are particles in the atmosphere to create the clouds. And then this idea that it was cosmic rays reaching the lower atmosphere. And so this was a mechanism. Now, the IPCC rejected it because they said, it's not proven, it didn't come out in time. And in the latest report, they just got a few lines directed at it, and that's it. But if you think about it, the cloud is acting like a screen in the greenhouse. And everybody's sort of getting an understanding of what the greenhouse is about. Well, the cloud cover acts like that screen, so it blocks the sunlight and cools the Earth, or if it isn't there, the sun gets in and warms the Earth. So we do have a legitimate mechanism now.
Why is the focus on carbon? And then we'll bring in the other guests as well. But what is this preoccupation with carbon? Where did it come from? When I read in your book that carbon is heavier than air, it completely blew my mind. So how is this possible that we're focused on taxing people for carbon when it's organic and it's heavier than air and it's everywhere? I don't get it.
Yes, I remember giving a talk in Coeur d'Alene a couple of years ago, and this old chemist stood up on the stage and asked anybody there if they remembered their periodic table, and reminded them that CO2 is heavier than air. So how in the world can it be rising up into the sky and creating these problems that you're talking about? In fact, this last summer I was visiting Chicago, and I went to visit the Museum of Science and Industry. And in the Museum of Science and Industry, they have a reproduction of a coal mine because there's so much coal that has been discovered under Illinois. And so we took this elevator ride supposedly down into the coal mine, and then when we got out of the elevator, there was somebody there to give us a safety lecture. And one of the things they had was one of those old-fashioned canary cages that the mines, the coal mines, would have, because the canaries have such small lungs, and if there was something wrong with their oxygen supply, the canary would be the one to die and warn them to get out of there. Well, they look out for carbon monoxide, but one of the big things that those canaries could also warn them was of carbon dioxide, which sinks. So it's just amazing that we're worried about that. I think it all has to do with global governance. I don't think it has anything to do with the climate. And this is my personal opinion, but I think that this has to do with taking control of our lives. I think that the cap and trade thing that they're talking about could be more appropriately be called control and tax. So to me, it has to do with control and power. Nothing to do with the climate other than that they can sneak it by us.
The whole world, almost the whole world, all of the environmental, quote, activists, advocates. I've been an environmental advocate, okay, for years, and I was sure we were doing it. I mean, really. Now, I want to say this to all of you. Nobody can fault the people that are upset and want better for the earth, or the people that are connected to the planet and want to, quote, get rid of this enemy called carbon. But the thing is that it's an enemy that's been created or miscommunicated, because carbon is not our enemy, and the percentage of it that we have anything to do with is like what, 1% to 2%?
Oh, it's not near that high. I think in our atmosphere, if you took all of the CO2, if you could compare our atmosphere, let's say, to a basketball arena that holds 10,000 people, the carbon dioxide would amount to 4 seats in that arena.
That's shocking.
It is. It's just.
So how is it that the IPCC was formed? And
Kim, can I jump in on this?
Sure.
First of all, we've got to clarify for the listeners that carbon and CO2 are two different things. Carbon is a solid. CO2 is a gas. Okay. And this is one of the games that they've played, is getting this confusion, all right? And we talk about carbon footprints and so on. Bob is correctly talking about CO2. All right, and CO2 is presented as a greenhouse gas, and it's less than 4% of the total greenhouse gases, which most people don't know. And he's correct that it's more dense than air, but they assume that it's mixed evenly throughout the atmosphere and so on and so forth. And I mentioned earlier in one of my comments about, the analogy I use is it's like somebody's going to do a physiological study of Kim, and they take one wart on your left arm and
which you won't find. Go ahead. Use a better example, for God's sake. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is representative of your whole body, and that's what they're doing with the CO2. Now, the question I keep asking people, and you're implying, is why has that become the focus? And I happen to think that it goes back to Morris Strong's statement 30 years ago. Morris Strong was an advisor to the Secretary General of UN, Kofi Annan. He came out of Canada and made a lot of money as an industrialist, and then decided that the problem, and this is his quote from 30 years ago, the problem for the planet are the industrialized nations, and isn't it our responsibility to get rid of them? And I want the listeners to think about, how would you go about doing that? Well, if you consider that the industrialized nations are fossil fuel driven, and to shut down those engines, or that engine of those nations, then you've got to shut off the energy flow. But if you do that, people will scream immediately. But if you can show that the byproduct of those industrialized nations is destroying the planet through climate change and global warming and so on, then you can effectively convince people to stop using the fossil fuels, which effectively gets rid of the industrialized nations. So Morris Strong, and he was challenged by Elaine Dewar, and you can read about it in her book on the Cloak of Green, And it's a wonderful book because she set out to write a book praising the environmentalist leaders in Canada. And in her research, she found out that these were not people that, they had a political agenda, and it was very egotistical and all